In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the front wheel bearing on this Dodge Grand Caravan. Let's get started. Take a 19mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. Now with a 21mm socket, remove the 2 caliper bracket 2 knuckle bolts. We're going to take the whole caliper and bracket assembly off and set it aside. There's one. I'm going to leave this partially threaded in so it'll hold the caliper while I take this one off. Now you can take this one out completely. Support the caliper, remove that initial bolt that you had out. Now you can pull it off of the rotor. Depending on how stuck it is, you may or may not need a small pry bar to help you out. And now you don't want to let it hang on the brake hose, so I have a bungee cord ready to hold this on. I just hooked it onto the coil spring on the strut. Hang it up here. That way it puts no pressure on the brake hose. Make sure it's not going to fall off. That's secure. Now remove your rotor. If for some reason it's stuck on, use a hammer, tap right in between the lug studs, make sure you don't hit the threads. That should break it free, but if you're reusing it, don't hammer the braking surfaces. Now let's take the backing plate off so we can access the hardware for the ABS sensor. It has 3 10mm bolts on. Hopefully yours aren't too rusty. Take them all off. Hold that backing plate. It should come out that way. Now, follow the ABS wire to where it mounts onto the frame or the body here. It's got a bracket. We're going to have to pull this off of the bracket. 2 little retainers. Use a trim tool. Pry those out, just like that. And then you'll see a red locking tab. Unlock that by pushing it backwards. This will allow you to press down on the main lock of the connector and get this disconnected. There we go, unplug those. Now let's disconnect the ABS sensor from all of its retainers. Just pull these off. The rubber grommets should slide out of their brackets. Get this out of here, all the way to the wheel bearing. I like to wrap this around the wheel bearing, that way it's pretty much contained in this area. Now with a 32mm socket, remove your axle nut. If you don't have a powerful air impact, put a pry bar between the lug studs, and then you can hold this hub to break it free with a breaker bar. Make sure the axle pushes through at this point. If it's seized in the hub, you can either use a rubber mallet and tap it through, or a punch with a steel hammer. There are 4 15mm bolts holding this wheel bearing on from the back side. 2 are on this side, 2 are on the other side. To get to them, you'll have to push the axle in all the way, and to hold it that way, I'm just going to use a pry bar, stick it back there, and you'll have to use a swivel socket, unless you use a wrench on this. 15mm once again. That's one. With those 2 off, let's move to the other side. Same setup on this side. There's one. All right. Now take a hammer, tap the wheel bearing back and forth, or top to bottom. Basically, we're trying to work this out of the knuckle. There it is. Push the axle through. There's the bearing. Wipe off any debris that's on the axle shaft here, and I have this little shim here that I'm going to leave on. If you have it, it's important to leave it back on here because it helps space the axle out correctly from the bearing. I'm just going to wipe this off, like this. Wipe around here. I do have some corrosion built up around the knuckle here, so I'm just going to take a wire brush and wire brush this entire area because I want the new bearing to seat in properly. Take a wire brush, and if you have a serious amount of corrosion, consider sanding it down. But keep in mind, whatever you do, this is an aluminum knuckle, so it's very easy to actually chew through the aluminum with some coarse sandpaper. So just be very gentle when you do this. You don't want to remove material, you just want to remove the rust. Rinse it with some brake parts cleaner to get all the dust and debris and oils off. We will apply anti-seize right after this when it dries, so I want to make sure I get everything else off of here. Now I'm going to coat this with some anti-seize just so that it doesn't rust in the future. A light coating. If you put too much, it's just going to squish out as you drive the wheel bearing in, so apply it all over the inside here where you cleaned. On the outside as well, right here where it makes contact so that it doesn't corrode. And I'm going to put some on the splines of the axle. This is going to prevent the axle from seizing inside the hub in the future. I'm not going to put any on the splines. I'm not going to put any on the threads of the axle nut. That I'm going to leave uncoated so that the axle nut can have a proper torque. Okay, now we can put our new wheel bearing on. Now grab the new wheel bearing, line it up, and press it on. You want to make sure you don't use a hammer to tap it in. It should slide in with just some light wiggling back and forth. If you tap it on the hub side or on the face of the hub, you could potentially damage it. Now from the back side, I'm going to start the bolts in. You want to make sure the threads start on smoothly by hand. You don't want to run them in with a power tool right off the bat because you could cross thread them. I'll put both of these on this side, and then we'll go to the other side and start the other two. These all started on smoothly, so now let's bottom them out. Now I'm going to tighten this up in a cross pattern so that I can bottom out the wheel bearing evenly. If you tighten one side and then the other, you risk putting it at an angle and it may not actually fully tighten or bottom out up against the knuckle. It doesn't matter where you start as long as you go in a cross pattern. I'm just going to start over here. Now we'll move to the other corner on top. And then back to this side on top. And lastly, the other side on the bottom. Now the torque for all four of these is 37 foot-pounds. If you want to torque it in a cross pattern, you can, but they're already snug, so I'm just going to go around in a circle basically and tighten these. Once again, 37 foot-pounds. All right, they're all torqued. Now let's grab the ABS wire and re-secure it onto all of its retaining points here. That way we can have the wire secured and not move around and potentially get damaged. And last one over here. Now grab the connectors, plug them in. There we go, I heard a click. You also want to lock it down. That way you make sure it definitely does not come unplugged while you're driving. And then it's important to reconnect this on the bracket up here so that it doesn't fall down, get caught in the wheel. Press that in. There you go. Put the axle nut back on and let's bottom it out. I'm going to bottom it out with my air impact, but the torque is only 118 foot-pounds, so I don't want to keep going after it stops spinning. I'm going to stop right there. Now I'll grab the torque wrench. To torque this, you can put a pry bar through the lug studs. That's going to hold the hub from spinning. And then use your torque wrench. 118 foot-pounds is the torque for this. That's it right there. Take this off. Now let's put the backing shield back on here, line it up, and start in the bolts. Once they're all started, snug them up. These don't need to be very tight, they're small, and you don't want to break them inside the knuckle. Now let's put the rotor on the backside. If you have to, clean it up right here where it sits on the hub so it can have a nice flat mounting surface. I cleaned mine up so it's ready to go on. Line it up, press it on here. Let's put the caliper on. Now grab your caliper, slide it over the rotor. There we go. Line up the bolt holes and start these 2 caliper bracket bolts in. Make sure they start on smoothly. With them started, let's bottom these out, and then of course we'll torque them. 125 foot-pounds is the torque for both of these. Let's get the wheel back on. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and in a cross pattern, torque them to 100 foot-pounds. Double check them.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.